Good afternoon. This is Briefing with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, here on KGRDB.com. That is KGR Radio. You can catch me every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KGRA's Rumble channel, their Facebook page, and their Twitter feed. I just want to tell you, for Thanksgiving, I went down and I helped the homeless out. I served food at the Los Angeles Mission, and it was a great event. We served 2,500 meals to the homeless. I do this every year. I sit on their board. Check out the Los Angeles Mission at www.losangelesmission.org and make a small donation today, because we're going to do this again for Christmas. I haven't done Christmas, but I think I'm going to do it this year because I'm going to be in town. It's a great event. They've been around for 85 years. They do really good work. They do wraparound services for people who are ready to get off the streets. And they make the sign of the cross so they don't get any money from government. So they count on people like you to make a donation today. Now, you can catch me on Twitter at LAC Jordan. I opine about a lot of things on Twitter, so just jump on Twitter at LAC Jordan and follow me. Follow me on Twitter. I'm almost up to the 5,000 follower mark. I'm getting there. So, but today we're going to have Thomas Speciale on my show. Thomas has been on before. He's most recently worked for the Director of National Intelligence, and he has some opinions on some stuff. And we're going to talk to him about his confrontation. He confronted John Brennan regarding Russiagate and the Biden laptop. That hit it about 2 weeks ago, and I had a medical procedure. I was going to bring him on that day. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle my show that day, and I had to cancel, right? And so, but I'm doing much better now. And we're going to also hopefully talk about J6, and he's going to talk about the seditious six, the people who told the military not to follow illegal orders, whatever they are. But before we do that, I wanted to do a lead segment because I just, we had on November 26th, we had two National Guardsmen shot in D.C. In a terrorist attack. And it was the follow-on comments from the left and trying to deflect blame or from the Biden administration, but I was just saying stupid stuff in public. It just was driving me nuts because, I was the chief of the LA Metro. These guys were hanging out, the National Guardsmen. They were deployed near a transit station, which is a typical thing to do when you're surging resources in a big city. That's what New York did. New York, when they were having problems in their transit system, Governor Hochul put the National Guard on the transit system. And then we have all these leftists bashing Trump for doing exactly what Hochul did, right? So this terrorist, drove all the way from Washington State, and he fired on two of our National Guardsmen, or I should say guardswomen and guardsmen, and killed one. Sarah Beckstrom, 20 years old, died in this attack, and Andrew Wolf, 24 years old, was seriously injured, and he seems to be responding well to treatment. They said that he's awake now and he's responding and talking. So good news, at least on Andrew, and our thoughts and prayers with both the families. And but I wanted to talk a little bit about, and this is what drives me crazy, is when these pundits get on there and they're looking to deflect blame. And they're looking to just distract. They're looking to make up nonsense. So what Trump did in D.C. is he surged the National Guard to the city to reduce crime. There had been multiple incidents of crime that hit the media, and that's not unusual in D.C. Now, a lot of this increase in crime in D.C. and all of our cities is because of the defunding of the police. And by surging uniforms into D.C., you discredit that, because what they're saying is, well, we defund the police and we invest in the communities. And most of the major cities, and all the major cities, that is a failed strategy. It's not working. It's been going on for 10 years in some cities, certainly in Los Angeles. That's how long it's been going on. And it's failing. It's absolutely failing. So by surging the National Guard into D.C. and lowering crime, I think I saw some stats today that the number of homicides since deployment has dropped by 50% in D.C. Now, that's a success. That's a success that nobody can argue with. Yet, when these guys were shot, the left-wing meeting talked about how it was inappropriate for the National Guard to be there. It's inappropriate, and it put them in harm's way. Now, this one, I just, I wanted to throw my cell phone at the TV, and here's why. We put our men and women in uniform in harm's way. We put them in harm's way in Vietnam years ago. Obviously Korea, certainly in Afghanistan, in Iraq. We really put them in harm's way, and they're saying we can't put them in our national capital because they're in harm's way. Think about what you're saying, the idiocy of what you're saying. We can't put our National Guardsmen in any of our big cities because they're in harm's way. Think about that, how moronic that is. And this is what they were saying. Think about it. We can send grandma out there to ride on a transit system, but we can't send the National Guard there because it's too dangerous for them. Think about that. It makes absolutely no sense. And yet, they must have these pundits on speed dial, dummy on speed dial, call them up, come on in, say something stupid. And when I went to look for these clips, because this was a couple weeks ago, I went to look for the clips to see if they're there. Of course, they purge all those stupid quotes out because they must look at them after the fact. Go, oh yeah, that was really dumb. Let's not make a YouTube clip for that one. So I couldn't find them all. But I remember watching this, thinking to myself, these people are nuts. They're absolutely nuts. And there's one other thing that they said that, because I couldn't figure out what was, I thought the dumbest quote was, we can't put them out there because they're in harm's way. That was absolutely, but they had a number two one. Trump has put the guys in harm's way, but the number one, the second dumbest comment was, he's sending more in, so more people will be in harm's way. Now, here's the thing. I was in the, protecting critical infrastructure game against terrorism for probably 10 years. And that was about 14 years ago. I had a security clearance. And whenever we got threat or intel or chatter that something was going to happen, we would surge resources. And certainly after an event, particularly on a transit system, because I was protecting transit, like the Madrid attack, the London attacks, we surged resources onto our transit system to make people feel safe. See, terrorism is designed to make you feel unsafe because you're unsafe, government changes policies. That's the goal, right? So what do you do to minimize the effects of a terrorist attack? You surge resources. So surging 500 more National Guardsmen to DC to make people feel safer is a strategy for reducing the terror that comes out of a terrorist attack. And yet we had these moronic people on these mainstream news outlets saying, oh no, now they're putting more people at risk. What is Trump doing? And I'm thinking to myself, these people are idiots. They're absolutely idiots. They have dummies on speed dial. It's just driving me crazy. So I had to talk about that one, and I wanted to get it out there real quick because before it gets too old, the story gets too old. And I know we're going to cover a couple other things that are a little old, but Thomas sent us a video. And well, let's bring Thomas on first, and then we'll introduce the Seditious Six video.
Hey, Chief, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you? All right. Yeah. You got to comment on it. What do you think about the? I mean, I'm a former chief. I'm thinking, what are these idiots saying? But what do you?
Yeah, I have been saying for several years since I ran for U.S. Senate out here when the gun violence, everybody was ranting and raving about gun violence, and I said, what the American people don't understand really is that there's 17 inner city neighborhoods that are responsible for about 90% of all homicides in the United States every single year. 90% of the homicides from about 17 neighborhoods, they are literal war zones. We lose more people in these war zones inside our country than we did in Afghanistan. In 20 years in Afghanistan, we lose about, I think the number's probably around 12 or 14,000 people to homicides every year right now in the United States. Well, we only lost, I think the number is like 5,000 or 6. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a fraction of what we lose every single year in these inner city neighborhoods. And for, I was looking at, I have a very good friend who's a policeman in New York, and he's actually in one of my former reserve units, and he's very senior. And I asked him, I said, do they, when was the last time they used National Guard in New York? Chief, they're still doing it. They have been doing it for 25 years. It's called Operation Empire Sentinel or something like that.
Yeah.
And the National Guard have been on the streets and on the subways of New York for like 25 years. They've never, ever gone away from there. And so this isn't something that they did and then they stopped. They have continued to do this because it was so bad in New York. The reality is, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's something that I think is very important that those presence patrols of National Guardsmen they have saved hundreds of lives already this year. And another factor that's very important, and I know you'll appreciate this, it's also prevented all the attempted homicides that would have, which is a number we don't even normally track because the person survives, so they don't end up in the death toll. Okay. But the attempted homicides are 10 times the number of the actual successful homicides. And so people don't understand that what has happened in DC is, probably thousands of crimes have been prevented just by mobilizing the National Guard, and all they did was walk around. Now they're armed, and I wouldn't have them in any group less than 4 people. I would have them in a team. I'd have them in a team environment. I wouldn't have them out there only 2 people. I would have
It
them out
sounds
there a
like
minimum of 4.
it
So
sounds like they were people in proximity. I mean, they heard the gunfire and
they
they
were, yeah.
responded. And I heard a major responded, and he wasn't armed, but just a knife, and he jumped in with his knife. So good for him.
Yep.
I'm waiting to hear that story come out. But I think
Yep.
the visible presence, it destroys the notion that we defund the police notion. We don't need all that visible police, right? Then when you surge a bunch of National Guardsmen, visible,
Yep.
and guardswomen, and it reduces crime, well, it certainly dispels the notion that the defund the police movement, right? It makes it look stupid, right? Which is what I think they did.
Have you ever heard, Chief, of the no policing era? Have you ever heard that statement?
I have not heard that statement, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I think he was like the chief of the Police Chiefs Association or something like that was talking about the United States entering an era of no policing, where it was essentially like we were forbidden to kind of police American citizens, and it was going to basically be like the Wild West. Well, the reality is, the police, as you well know, the police cannot save you from violence. They can try and hopefully be enough of a presence that in particular neighborhoods it's not a problem, but they can't be there every time a crime is going to occur. There's just no way. It's just mathematically, economically impossible. So we are our first line of defense against violent crime, and that's why all of these crimes occur in gun-free zones, because the criminals know where to go. And DC is nothing but a gun-free zone. It's one big gun-free zone, and it's a tragedy. A lot of these crimes would be prevented just by having, I call it the air marshal effect. You basically say, we're going to issue concealed carries to law-abiding citizens. And the American people don't even need to know how many are issued. But that would tamp down a lot on crimes, because the criminals would be worried about that the guy in the convenience store is, he's packing a 45, because they wouldn't know who has the guns.
Yeah, and let me do a shout out to the ICE and all the work they're doing, because they're taking all these immigrant criminals off the street, as well as other immigrants off the streets, and you're seeing crime getting lowered in those areas where they're working, right? And so we got to do a shout out for them, because they've been called a bunch of nasty names, and it's just not true. Memphis is very happy. When you see them talk to citizens about what's going on in Memphis, they have the highest murder rate in Memphis, and Trump's deployed the National Guard there, and their neighborhoods are safe. One guy said, I could ride my bike in my neighborhood. One little kid, I saw him getting interviewed. So this is the result of presence. This is a result of good policing. When you do good policing, it's a result of deploying the National Guard. I don't think it's a long-term strategy, because it gets expensive, but the long-term strategy is refunding the police and refocusing on community-oriented policing.
And I would argue too that this is a product of leadership. That's what this is. This is a leader that is willing to take the slings and the arrows, and fight against the people against him publicly, to do what is right for the American people at great expense. And it's leadership, and it's fearless, courageous, noble leadership. And you're never going to hear the left is never going to thank Trump for saving all the lives he has in New York, Memphis. They're never going to thank him for that. Never. It'll never ever happen. That's why we have to thank him.
And the media will never tally it up. Okay, so let's get into. I got to let you give me a little bit of your background. I know your most recent gig in government was working with the Director of National Intelligence, right? So what are you doing now, and what did you do in the recent past, so our audience understands your expertise?
Yeah, I've been in the military since 1987, except for a short break for college. I've done everything from being a military policeman to being an infantryman, deploying with special forces as an interrogator. And then ultimately, for the last 20 years, I've worked in the national intelligence community, either at the Defense Intelligence Agency or at the ODNI, the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And recently, when Trump went in on January 20th, I also swore in on that day, and I served for about 4 months as the senior advisor to the DNI on counterintelligence and security. And so basically what that is basically looking for the bad actors inside our country. I have a long history of doing CT, including domestic terrorism. counter domestic terrorism. And but ultimately, the counterintelligence mission is very different. It's very focused on foreign intelligence operatives or foreign influence operations in the United States. And I did that until April. Since then, I've moved over. I've been doing a lot of consulting with a variety of companies and political candidates regarding national security issues, and that's what I've been doing, as well as getting ready for law school. By the way.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Yeah.
CT, counterterrorism? Is that what you're saying?
Counterterrorism, yeah,
Okay.
counterterrorism.
So you can go to Thomas Speciale's website, just common spelling, Thomas, then SPECIALE.com, and check out his website. He's got it's chock full of a lot of information, and which I was reading through it. I couldn't read through everything you have on your website, but it's
Yeah.
got a lot of great information regarding J6, which hopefully we'll get into. But we had a recently we had 6 members of Congress talk about our military not following Trump's illegal orders, and they don't define what that is.
They have an obligation,
Yeah.
and that their oath requires them, which is incorrect anyway, but that their oath to the Constitution requires them to not follow illegal orders. Okay, it just shows how asinine this was, because basically nothing that they said was true.
We had a couple nurses out here, so this is the way I kind of see things. Until recently, Minneapolis chief of police just fell off the tightrope here, but a lot of chiefs of police and sheriffs are walking the tightrope, particularly in these blue states and these blue counties, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're walking the tightrope. They don't want to get in ICE's way, and yet they can't help ICE, right? So they're walking this tightrope, and you see them, and I've been watching them because I was a former chief high up, and so I'm watching how they handle it. And then recently we had the Minneapolis police chief jump onto the left side and saying, "Call us on 911, and we'll come if ICE shows up," right? So and this is my problem, because these leaders are saying this to the public. You can demand ICE give you a warrant. You can demand this. You can demand that. So they went after a guy, and he ran into a hospital. And I don't know if understand the law, the concept of hot pursuit. So I'm chasing somebody, hot pursuit, I don't need a warrant. The nurses don't know that. They just know that our leader said you can demand a warrant. They can't come in your building. So these guys are doing hot pursuit. They're within the law. The nurses don't know that. They get in their way. They put their hands on these guys, thinking that they're doing what their leader said they could do. Now they're facing federal prosecution, as they should, for battery and interfering an officer. So now we have these six people in Congress telling 18-year-old soldiers, you can ignore laws, and they don't know the legalities. They don't know you're going to go to law school. You're going to learn all this stuff, right? They don't understand the nuances of the law and what they can do and can't do, and how they identify the criteria whether something's illegal or not. That's what I equate it to. And I think, but you want to roll your video first, and then respond to my comment, okay? Let's roll this video on the seditious 6.
Hey everybody, Tom Speciale here. Hey, in response to members of Congress posting their veteran credentials and what their suggestions were yesterday regarding the disobeying of orders from the Commander-in-Chief and from the Secretary of War, I wanted to put my thoughts together, and I've written a statement. These are my own feelings. I think that they are absolutely and utterly supported by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, as well as the U.S. Constitution and our oath that we have sworn to protect our country. And so I want to read this because I didn't want to miss anything. My name is Thomas Speciale. I have over 34 years of service in the Army and the Army Reserves, over 20 years in the national intelligence community during intelligence analysis, human intelligence collection, and I recently served as a senior advisor for the DNI on counterintelligence and security. I've served on active duty as an artilleryman, as an infantryman, and an interrogator in Afghanistan alongside U.S. Special Forces. This is a message to all members of the military and our veterans. Indeed, this is a message to all Americans who love our country and our Constitution. What you saw yesterday from a number of U.S. congressmen and women is nothing more than a disinformation campaign targeting you directly,
specifically military, active duty military, and veterans, but it is ultimately directed at all Americans. These individuals are using their credentials in a fallacious argument that the U.S. military is being ordered to do something that is illegal. That is not what is happening. I view this action by these members of Congress as a direct assault on us and advocacy for mutiny. Advocacy for mutiny is a crime, and it is seditious. Their goal is to divide our military and damage our republic. I am not going to tell you what an illegal order is because I know you already know that. But what I saw yesterday is exactly the same thing that they did when they claimed that the military was filled with extremists. It was a lie then, and it is a lie now. This action is the most egregious abuse of their influence I have ever seen, except possibly for a number of woke generals who called for a purge of our military if they supported President Trump during his last administration. Remember, these are the same Congresspeople who supported the bogus J6 committee investigation, forcibly injected you with an experimental drug, spread bogus intelligence about the president being a Russian asset, the same people who told you that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation when they knew for a fact it was not. The same Congresspeople who are willing to disregard their oaths to protect the Constitution when they labeled patriotic Americans domestic terrorists for if they supported the Second Amendment and they exercised their First Amendment rights to free speech, freedom of assembly, practice of their religion, and freedom to redress their grievances. These are the same people that drove us into not one, but two false impeachments. They tried to bankrupt President Trump, they tried to imprison him, and they have tried to kill him twice. They tried to have him removed from the ballot. They will do anything it takes to stop him, including trying to get you to disobey supposed illegal orders. These are the same people that want women in men's bathrooms and sports. They label parents domestic terrorists for wanting to protect their children from sexual assault. These are the same people who burn cities all across the city, and they are the same members of Congress who advocated for defunding law enforcement and the murder of law enforcement. They are the people, then they turn to those same law enforcement and ask for protection. I already know that you will abide by your oath because we all know that oaths matter and that they never expire. And that oath is simple. We will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that we will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that we will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over us according to the regulations and Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help us God. If you have any questions about what an illegal order would actually be, or posse comitatus, or the Insurrection Act, please do your own research before you disobey orders from our Commander-in-Chief or from the officers placed over you. What these Congress people are advocating for is nothing less than mutiny. Don't fall for this disinformation campaign. Do not let them divide us. We are not red or blue. We are not white or black or brown. We are Americans, and we are veterans, and we are members of the military. And we are the backbone of this nation. Do not fall for this disinformation campaign, and do not buy into the suggestion to be mutinous against your Commander-in-Chief and the Secretary of War. Do not fall for the trap, because that is what this is. Their entire goal is to divide us against ourselves. Do not fall for it. God bless you. God bless our country. Oaths matter, and they never expire. Thank you.
Boom! You kind of answered my question there. What do you do if you're just a PFC there? Do your own research. Don't follow this political nonsense. So
That's right.
So yeah, this is a betrayal of, I think, of their oath. I think these people are outrageous because, it won't be them when they violate their orders or they go against orders. It won't be these Congress people that'll be tried or court-martialed. It'll be these young soldiers, right? The people who don't know any better. High school education people thinking that they're doing the right thing because these idiot congressmen said that. That's the part I think that bothers me the most. And I think you hit it really, really well on your statement. I'll let you add
Yeah,
if you have anything more to add.
I do. I have done some additional thought about it and done some additional research just so we could really start to help people understand what not only is it a disinformation campaign. I believe it's advocacy for mutiny, which is a crime, like a crime, as a criminal crime. And that's why they're probably going to recall Millie. I think Kelly. They're going to recall Kelly, which I've investigated, and it's happened in the past. He can be recalled and he can be court-martialed. He can, because he's retired reserves. He can be recalled. The other ones cannot, but because they aren't retired reserves, unless they're in the reserves, and I don't think they are. But I did some additional research. And I just want to, the illegal orders that is being supposed out there is that Hegseth issued an order to basically kill everyone, etc. That has been debunked since then. Over the last 5 days or so, that has been completely and utterly debunked. But the illegal, it would be an illegal order to target civilians. That would be an illegal order. Okay, that would be a crime. However, the people that we are targeting have been designated foreign terrorist organizations. And what the American people don't understand is that the drug cartels are working with the Chinese, they're working with the Iranians, they're working with the Russians.
Yes.
Okay. So, and this is, narco-terrorism is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry, and our foreign adversaries are taking advantage of our laws, and they have weaponized these narco-terrorist organizations. They're killing 100,000. We have 100,000 fentanyl deaths a year. And I am convinced there's an office in China where some guy is keeping track of how many American citizens they kill every year with fentanyl. I'm convinced of that. They also launder all the money up in Canada through Chinese brokerages, right? So it's a huge international problem. But here's some important distinctions that I came across. An order is not considered illegal simply because a service member dislikes it or finds it controversial. That's number one. Okay. Right. Which, the only reason I say that is because that's not really part of our training, because we already know that. It's like a no shit Sherlock if it's, but then here's the interesting thing I came across. The standard for an unlawful order is that it must be patently or blatantly illegal, meaning it involves a clear and obvious violation of the law.
Yeah.
Because of the foreign terrorist organization designation, it's a completely legal order to kill them because they are perpetrating crimes against the United States. And it may be an unconventional warfare technique that they are employing, but the Chinese are the ones that are facilitating this. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Venezuelan government, et cetera. So they are essentially trying to look for a loophole in our laws, and they can't find it because ultimately they've been designated finally a foreign terrorist organization.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, I've been talking about fentanyl for 2 years, and the numbers just keep going up. I mean, not just the shipment of them in and over our borders, but also these Soros-funded DAs who refuse to prosecute drug dealers in our cities, and it's killing. And the Democrats own these failures. They absolutely own these failures. But yeah, so I'm glad that you gave the definition of what is a clear illegal order, because these six wouldn't do that. They wouldn't pull that definition up and say, that it has to be clear and obvious, right? As to use my words, and that's where I have my problems, because it's it's kind of the same thing with the cops and ICE. Okay, well, we're not going to help ICE. You're going to respond when what can they do, right? Making sure that our chiefs and our sheriffs.
Well, the police better not interfere with federal law enforcement.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, if they interfere with federal, look, you can probably get away with not helping them, okay? Unless somebody gets hurt, and then all of a sudden you're going to have really bad stinking egg on your face for a federal law enforcement officer who calls for help, which did happen, and the police don't show up to help. That is going to be a problem, because that means that federal law enforcement may turn their back on them when they need help.
That's exactly right. And we've seen some I don't want to say leadership, but just common sense, where some leaders are saying, just stay out of their way and we will respond. I think Chicago said this: if they're calling for help, we're coming. Right. The chief of the superintendent of Chicago, which makes absolute sense. And he also clarified, if people are following you and ramming your car, that's a life-threatening situation. So he debunked the nonsense that Johnson and Pritzker were saying. So we have some. Those chiefs and sheriffs are on a tightrope in those big cities, and I appreciate everything they're doing.
Chief, I think the interesting thing here is we shouldn't have to have ICE in these cities. This is because the Democrats imported 20 million illegals, including this guy that traveled from Washington all the way. The whole Afghan failure. Look, I'll tell you, I want to bridge these two things. Here's an interesting thing. This guy, this Afghan, came in under a special interest alien visa. He was vetted by the CIA because he was a pipe hitter in Afghanistan against Afghans. That's what he was. He was a trained pipe hitter by the CIA and probably special forces to kill other Afghans who were a threat to the Afghan government. Well, they weren't vetted to come to the United States and be American citizens.
Yeah.
This is the problem that people don't understand with like Mayorkas saying that they were vetted. Yeah, they were vetted to be pipe hitters in Afghanistan. They were not vetted to come and be law-abiding citizens in a Judeo-Christian country in the United States. They just simply were not. That is totally a lie.
Yeah, well,
Totally.
we're getting used to that with the Biden administration, but we're going to move on. We got to get into your John Brennan confrontation, and because I thought that was awesome, what you did. And you were at a conference and you had an opportunity to challenge Brennan. What caused you to want to do this challenge, put him on the spot? Just a minute, because I want to get in the clip too.
Yeah. Okay. So let me set up the clip and then play the clip. And then after the clip, then we can talk about it.
Okay.
Do you have both clips with the reception? Or
yeah. I got him on stage, and then I got him when you hit him up about Hunter's laptop. So let's do on stage first.
This just came up on my LinkedIn as a conference. It was called the Directors. Clapper, Brennan, and Hayden were all going to be there. And I was like, that's local. It's at George Mason University. I'm going to this. And I thought I would get maybe a sidebar conversation with them. And I had these two questions, which I'll let the video speak for itself. But ultimately, I never intended for any of this to become public. It would have just been a sidebar conversation was my intent. But then they said, well, we're going to take some questions for the panel. And I was like, well, maybe he's not going to go to the reception. So maybe I should just ask the question publicly. Yeah. And they were recording it. I wasn't recording anything. The actual venue was recording everything. And so I brought nobody with me. I was totally by myself. And the first clip is
let's roll that first clip. It's called I got a Brennan Russian dossier clip. It's only a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, good.
Amanda.
The first ICA was released regarding cyber influence on the 2016 election. I was there. I was working in the NIM. I read it. I also was involved in setting up the Principals Committee meeting that took place in December that resulted in President Obama directing a more fulsome, because I understand the difference between a cyber ICA and a total whole of government ICA intelligence collection on Russian involvement or influence in the election. And I noticed immediately in the ICA, the second ICA, because I had access to the classified ICA, that there were statements in that ICA that were not supported with the sourcing that was associated to the ICA, specifically that that Putin had directed the action and that Putin had, that the Russians were actively trying to support President Trump instead of just sow chaos.
Your question.
My question. There was an email that went around from General Clapper to yourself and Hayden. I'm sorry, not Hayden.
That's right.
Yourself and Comey, etc., that basically said we all got to get on board with this, otherwise it isn't going to work, basically. And I think that email puts everybody in the crosshairs. I would like to hear what your justification was for supporting the dossier that was known to be false being used as source material in the second ICA.
I don't know who put you up to this.
Nobody put me up to this, sir. I'm here on my
I don't know
own.
what role you played or who you are, but there's a bunch of bullshit that you just passed on.
The emails are clear, sir.
Bullshit.
The emails are clear.
Bullshit.
The emails are clear. The second question.
No, I think we're going to go. We can talk about it. Talk about it in the reception.
Yeah, I just love that. Everybody's really uncomfortable on stage, and so what so when you say the second CIA, that was
The intelligence, an ICA is an intelligence community assessment.
and that was used to help get the FISA warrant. Is that correct?
No. The dossier was used. The Steele dossier was used from mid 2019 to get the FISA warrants against Carter Page and ultimately to spy on the Trump campaign.
Right.
And then he won. And of course, everybody realized that, Mike Flynn was going to realize that there was a Crossfire Hurricane investigation and he was going to blow the lid off that. So they had to get rid of him really fast. But before they did that, what they did was they took the dossier and they wormed it into all of the intelligence community assessment, an ICA, on the Russian influence into the 2020 or the 2019, 2020, the 2020 campaign or election. And so ultimately what they said is we have this classified reporting and it says that Russians were trying to get Trump elected and that Putin directed it. Well, the intelligence reporting did not support that. Yes. In fact, there was actually intelligence reporting that contradicted that we had sources that were saying the Russians don't think Trump can win, but they're going to sow as much chaos as possible with this influence operation. Hillary Clinton has lupus. Hillary Clinton is a witch. Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump's a racist, whatever. They were spreading all this information to just sow chaos in our election. And Putin didn't direct them to support Trump. It was just a normal intelligence operation for them to try and sow chaos in our election. But the problem was they knew that and they put it in the intelligence community assessment anyway. But then the worst part is then they leaked, they gave the classified assessment to members of Congress. And then members of Congress were all running around, Democrats were all running around saying, we've seen the proof. We've seen the evidence. And it was all bogus intel. And it was a disinformation campaign. It was really offensive counterintelligence operation perpetrated by the FBI, the CIA, and members of Congress against the American people. Is what it was. It was an intelligence operation to influence the election or
so
his administration.
What it did is it added credibility to the Steele report, which
correct,
right? It underpinned it and gave it the support. We would call that bootstrapping a search warrant, right?
Yeah.
And so they bootstrapped that to give it energy and legs so that they could undermine the Trump administration. Is what I mean. That's how I see it. And the
undermine our country. They undermined our country.
Oh, yeah. And but what I really liked is how uncomfortable John Brennan got because he knew you got him. I mean, I did some detective work, but I wasn't the guy that had him in the box and getting him to talk and all that stuff that you see on TV. Good investigators, but man, he was uncomfortable. They were all uncomfortable on that stage.
Hayden was the one going next.
I know. They were scared. They go, "Who is this guy?" And I just love that because that's the kind of questions that needed to get asked. And
as far as I know, I'm the only person that's asked him that question publicly.
Oh, and he got upset. I mean,
he was very upset. Well, and then he showed up. I thought he wasn't going to probably be at the reception after that. And I even thought they might even have kicked me out of the venue, but they didn't. Right. I went over and talked to the security guards because they got all flustered. And I was like, "Are you guys good?" And they're like, "No, you're good." And I was like, "Okay." And so then I went to the reception and I was there at the reception for like 30 minutes. And then I saw Brennan.
Oh, wait, God. This one's even better. I mean, I can't, they're both great, but let's roll the second one. It's the Hunter. I call it the Hunter laptop clip. Let's roll that one.
Why didn't you know on the Hunter Biden? Why? Because I did it. And you misrepresented that. We never said it was disinformation. We said it was Russian influence operations, which is what they do. There's a big difference between influence operations. No, you don't know that. Yes, Comey knew. Comey knew. The literature said it had all marks.
Man, you got him. I know you couldn't hear that very much, but you're challenging him on the Hunter laptop. Why did you do that? What, and
Again,
then
totally unplanned. Totally unplanned, Chief. It was totally unplanned. I saw him standing there. He was standing with some college kids from George Mason, and I walked up to him, and I stood there at a distance and let him see me. So when I did my approach, he was welcoming it. And all I asked was, I said, after the whole thing with the ICA, why would you have signed this 51 intelligence officer's memo saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was, had all the earmarks of Russian influence operation, or, no, it didn't. They knew that the Hunter Biden laptop was legit. And I stated in that interaction, I said, Comey knew. It wasn't Comey. The whole FBI knew that it was legit. Okay.
Yeah.
And so my point in that is they did it because we've got the email from Morrell that says we need a talking point to about the Hunter Biden laptop. Will you guys sign this memo? So it originated from the Democrats, just like the Steele dossier. Okay. And then they signed it and they pushed it out. And by the way, this went through pre-pub review at CIA. So CIA approved this for release. And they knew it was a disinformation operation against the American people on the Hunter Biden laptop. They were trying to help Biden get elected over Trump. That's what they were doing. And the thing about this whole interaction that's important is, again, I was not there with a camera guy. I literally was just talking to him. And as I turn around after he runs away, as I turn around, there's this total stranger there videotaping the interaction. And I said, can you send me that? And he's like, oh, sure. And so I gave my business card, and I didn't have any way to contact the guy, but he sent it to me the very next day and gave it to me. And I was like, okay, and again, the only reason I published them is because of the indictments that we heard were coming. And I felt that it was necessary to get this information to the administration. They needed to see how uncomfortable he was. And because, like I said, the ICA thing, the Crossfire Hurricane, all of that was a offensive counterintelligence operation against the Trump campaign. They were spying on the Trump campaign to try and prevent him from becoming the president. Then he becomes the president. The ICA essentially perpetrates the hoax against everyone in the United States by bootstrapping it with this bullshit on the dossier. And then, to top matters off, to stop him from getting reelected, they did it again. And that's why the two questions, which was your original question. Why did you feel the need to do this? Because our own government perpetrated intelligence operations against the American people, not against Trump. This is not about Trump. Yeah. This is not about Carter Page. It's not even about Michael Flynn. It was about stopping Trump from making America great again. They would lose control. And, we're hoping that, General Flynn's out there talking about the CIA needs to be broken apart. And I've been out there for several years talking about the FBI needs to be broken apart. These organizations have they've outgrown their usefulness in their current status, in their current state.
Let's draw this back onto your comment about oath. Oaths are forever. You take an oath.
Yeah.
So as the director of the CIA, John Brennan took an oath, and he violated that oath when he undermined a sitting president, right? Or the guy coming in office. He violated the first go around, the whole Russian disinformation. That was a violation of his oath, because he knew he was undermining the Constitution and the constitutional mandate that the people did when they elected him.
That's right.
And the second issue is he's not in government, but he's been privileged to be able to get intelligence information and the title, and then he violated that privilege. Because I think if you're a former sitting CIA, you still get sensitive material and you still read stuff, and they ask you opinions and all that other stuff, and you sit on think tanks. So he has this privilege, and then he violates that privilege that we give a former CIA director to run this operation against the American people. Because you're right, I keep saying Trump, and you're right, it's against the American people regarding these 51 people in the Hunter Biden laptop. This is a person who's violated his oath. This is a person who's violated the trust of the American people. And your confrontation of him called him out, and that's why he's so angry. That's why he's hitting you in the chest, because you got his number. And as a cop, if I was interviewing this guy, I would say, "Ooh, there's something here."
Yeah.
Right. So I do appreciate you doing that. You can certainly comment on my last comments, and hopefully
No, I didn't even notice the poking in the chest. I didn't even notice it because, he's 70 years old. He's not really scary to me. But at the same time, I think that, my interrogator skills were kicking into high gear, and I knew by his reaction and his deflection, that he knew what he was doing when he did it. Here's the thing, and this is very important for your audience to understand. These people never expected this to all come out.
Yeah.
They never expected Tulsi Gabbard to release the emails. They didn't expect, because they didn't think anybody would know to ask. But there have been whistleblowers inside these organizations and people like myself who were fighting from inside. I didn't have to become a whistleblower, but there were people all along that were saying, guys, this ain't right. We shouldn't be doing this. We should not be doing this. This is not in line with our values, and it's actually against everything we've sworn to protect. And that's why we know about it. It's because of whistleblowers, and it's because of people fighting from the inside, and ultimately because Trump got reelected. If Trump hadn't gotten reelected, this would all be gone, guys. This would all be,
we wouldn't know about it.
it.
And it was, I'm way over here in California. For me, trying to put the dots together and figure out what the truth is hard, right?
Yeah.
But I tell you what, when you have 10 FBI agents become whistleblowers, that's unprecedented. And I interviewed one of those guys, and I'm thinking, this just doesn't make sense. FBI agents don't whistleblow. So this must be really bad. And then you had, I read they reinstated a bunch of them and they paid out a bunch, but 10 guys. That's a lot of people. I don't think we can do this justice, but I want to get into the J6 bomber thing, best we can. And Shauna, I forget her last name now as I do my notes, but so the blaze, I think we got a video. Let's throw it the video.
On January 5th, 2021, between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m., an unidentified individual placed pipe bombs near the offices of the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee in Washington, D.C. The FBI and our partners are renewing our call for tips from the public to help us identify the suspect. A reward of up to $500,000 is available for information that leads to the arrest and conviction of the individual responsible for this attempted attack. If you have any information, please call the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can also submit tips online at tips.fbi.gov. The FBI's estimate is the suspect's height is approximately 5'7" tall. The suspect wore a face mask, a gray hooded sweatshirt, and black gloves. They used a backpack to transport each of the devices. They were wearing distinctive Nike Air Max Speed Turf shoes, which are black and gray with the yellow Nike logo. Fewer than 25,000 of these shoes were sold between August 2018 and January 2021. The first time the suspect is seen is at approximately 7:34 p.m. at the intersection of 1st Street and North Carolina Avenue Southeast. The person walks southwest on North Carolina Avenue, turns north on New Jersey Avenue, west on D Street, and then south on South Capitol Street. This footage of the suspect on South Capitol Street shows the person setting down their backpack, which is believed to contain one of the bombs at this time. The suspect appears to put on a pair of glasses and scan the area, standing on tiptoes.
That's good enough, Amanda. I think that'll warm up this. So I didn't want to go through the whole thing because I'd rather do a little bit of discussion. So when the Blaze broke the story that they had done gait analysis and identified that Shauna Kirkwood, a former Capitol police officer's gait matched the gait analysis, and which my assumption is that there's a lot of video released of a lot of people that were at their J6, so they have a lot of her walking, and then they compared that to the suspect, and she has a very distinct walk because of an injury that she had. She was a Division I and a women's professional soccer player. She had an injury that caused her to have very distinct gait. Now, I know a little bit about gait analysis. I didn't trust it enough to buy it when I was when somebody's trying to sell it to me. But it's just kind of like a divining rod, just kind of points. And as I went through the evidence, because I'm looking at it as a cop, okay, the gait analysis kind of points in that direction, but also her height, 5'7". It lists on her roster when she played for Temple University, 5'7". So that matches, and that's pretty solid. Looking at a picture to figure out somebody's height, that part is pretty solid. But she also, the suspect knew the area, and this person's a Capitol Police officer, knew the shortcuts to get to these different buildings. So it would have to be somebody from the area. That fits. And the other thing that I read it in reports because she was somebody who testified at J6 cases that she had a background in training with the Capitol Police. Now, I come from a very large sheriff's department, and only the people who were involved in training actually have access to training aids. And I had heard that these bombs weren't actually bombs, but they appeared to be training aids that would be used by police officers. That's what I heard. And I think I heard that on a show that you were on. And so for me, I'm looking at, hey, there's plenty of probable cause here to do a warrant on her house, and she's our suspect. So tell me your thoughts. Why haven't we got after her more aggressively? Do you see it the way I do in terms of the probable cause? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that if she did it at the behest of the Capitol Police, then it's not a crime. And I have believed for a long time that this was an operation that was intended to be used to diffuse violence by putting out a communication, public communication. Pipe bombs have been found in the Capitol, and everybody's asked to leave due to threats to injury. That's what I've believed because of several things that are very, very important. The first pipe bomb was reported exactly about 10 minutes before the first breach on the perimeter. The second pipe bomb was reported 15 minutes after that. So that coincidence is impossible because the pipe bombs had laid in plain view for over 16 hours. They were not concealed, and they had laid in plain sight for over 16 hours. And then they just happened to be found within, a bracket right around the first breach of the Capitol, and reported by people who were associated with the Capitol Police or, organizations associated with the Capitol Police. That is extremely, extremely coincidental. It's also important, I think, that you showed that video, and it shows where clearly the person is signaling to the operator of the camera, I'm getting ready to start my run. She sets her backpack down. She grabs her phone. She's probably sending a text message. Oh, and by the way, the text messages and the signal, that all of the information from the phone, we don't know where it is. It was lost and it was deleted. How does that happen after supposedly the greatest domestic terrorist threat in all of United States history, and somehow we lost that one person's phone number? Okay, come on. It's a bunch
I
of
know. I got a rap, and so
I know
it's basically saying it's a tool. It was a tool to be able to clear out the Capitol by the. But it was also used by the Democrats to say that, hey, we were under threat. This was a terrorist act. It never got clarified. So that makes sense to me.
Nancy Pelosi would have had to have approved that operation because she sits on the Capitol Police Board.
Yes.
So the two sergeants at arms, the Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Senate, and the Capitol architect. And two of those 5 people are dead, as I understand it. So something ain't adding up here, because Nancy Pelosi would have known about this operation and ultimately the perpetration of the hoax after January 6th. It doesn't look good. It looks really, really deliberate and bad.
All right, we got a wrap. So I want to thank Thomas for coming on my show. Stick around for a quick debrief. You can find Thomas's information at his webpage, Thomas Speciale. That's Thomas Special with an E at the end, .com. And you can find all this information, and a lot of great research is done on J6. And certainly you can find the clips with Brennan. I think. Do they have you have your clips on your website?
No, that's on my Twitter at Speciale 4 VA. You can find that on my Twitter.
All right. Thank you for joining me again, Tom. Hey, thank you for joining us on Briefing with the Chief every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Amanda, you can take it away.